Welcome to Picks with the Professor, the sports betting show hosted by a real statistics professor. This is part 2 of the 2025 college basketball tournament show bracket special prediction. I don't know words.
Well,
This was not going to have as much sports betting content on it. Most of that's really going to be in part 1 because those are the matchups we know. Now we're going to talk about all the hypotheticals. So if you're not interested in bracket stuff, I love you, but this video probably isn't for you. But we have a bunch of other content out uh, around the first 4 games and around the first round games out there with betting things applicable. Here we will talk about projected spreads and projected totals. I will mention that because my model can do that, and I've got that set up to be able to put in any hypothetical that I want at any time, and it will spit out a number for us, and so we'll discuss that. But otherwise, we're just going to kind of mostly fill out this bracket, and we'll just get right to it here, picking up where we left off. I did already advance A&M into the second round based off my logic in part 1. They will face either Auburn or Louisville. Auburn will likely be favored by a decent bit. Jake, are you at all interested in trying to call this upset, or are we going to stay a little chalky early on before we start really getting into the nuts and bolts of where we should be deviating from the chalk strategically?
I think this one's chalky all over. I mean, I won't be totally shocked if Louisville pulls it off. I just don't think they've got the depth to go where I think this looks a lot like that Duke game in the ACC championship, where it is tight. We may be taking Louisville on the spread, but where it's tight, and then at the end, a couple threes don't go, and then Auburn stretches it out. And with Broom, you just hand it to him at the end of the clock, and he figures it out. It, just like he did to was it Ole Miss right there at the end of the clock. He just made a great. You knew everybody knew in the world knew where that ball was going. They handed it to him. Late shot clock makes a beautiful move off glass in, never question, puts the game out of reach.
Sideline has Auburn number 4 in the country, and it's really a top 4 and then everybody else. Of course, Duke, it's a top 1 with a healthy Cooper Flag. But without him, kind of drops into that with Duke, Houston, Florida, and Auburn as the top teams. I'm not really sure who's arguing against that, to be honest. And the model has it as well. Auburn's a really good team, like you said. We are going to pick some upsets, but it's not going to be this early. With regards to the betting projection, now this is obviously without the first game's data, which could change things. But we've got this Auburn by about 8, winning about 78-70, so a total around 148. And again, the key difference there is, like you said, with Auburn and that offense, and Broom is the difference. He's one of the best players in the country offensively. Both these defenses are good. It's just Auburn has that edge on offense, and that's going to be likely the thing that over the course of full 40 minutes pulls them apart. Now, towards the bottom of the bracket, one of the upsets we did have with that would be North Carolina that we are predicting to be Ole Miss playing Iowa State. And Iowa State, this is when we start really talking about the injury situation there and what that does to them. Is Iowa State healthy enough? This is one where I hate brackets. This is why I love survivor pools, because we're having to pick on Iowa State and we don't get to see it how they look without one of the better players in the country. So how do we handle this?
Yeah, this one is where everything's tough because like you've got, especially with a play-in, you've got really 3 games you're picking here, and it's I don't think Iowa State has enough with if Lipsy isn't full health
Hmm.
to get past either one of these teams. So here we're going with North Carolina. At least that would be. Um, but if Lipsy's at full health, that's a different story here because we know Gilbert's gone. It's very likely that there's a better than not chance he re-aggravates something against the Lipscomb team, and then that puts you in a weird hole. But also Winger and Iowa State is a very very good team and has been all year.
Lipsy is, according to the model, questionable right now. And that could go a lot of ways, especially as we get deeper and deeper into this. Now, at some point, we're going to start to assume these guys if they haven't re-injured anything, they will get healthy. Of course, unfortunately for them, Gilbert will not be, and that is of course factoring the model. And you're talking about between those two, Gilbert by himself, probably a couple points. That's not nothing for college
Yeah.
basketball. Lipsy right now, probably another couple points. So you're talking about 1 point right now in, and then another point depending on if he's out versus bring back a point if he's in. We've still got Iowa State more likely to win this one right now at 59% by 2.5 with a total in the low 150s if it were to be against North Carolina. But like you mentioned, there's just a lot happening here with regards to the variance of this one. And as we talked about in the first part too, your bracket strategy a lot of times is when you get to a game like this and you think, oh my gosh, the variance is through the roof, anything can happen. We start thinking to ourselves, I really hope I like picking the team to advance against them in the next round. And so, we'll play a little bit of a go different from the chalk here and take whoever wins that game. Again, we're thinking North Carolina against Iowa State, mainly just because the uncertainty of the injuries. I don't want. I think it's going to be harder for Iowa State to go deep. I don't want to take them too deep. It's unfortunate for them. They are a really good team. On the bottom half, finishing us out to get to the Sweet 16, Michigan State against New Mexico. Uh, we like both of these teams. Of course, you're pretty high on Michigan State. I assume we're going to be on Michigan State here, and then the only question is how much do we think they can win by?
Yeah, and I've really, if this is the matchup, to, like I don't know what the line would like in a hypothetical world, but I would be leaning over. You got two faster-ish paced teams that have very good offenses. The defense is like that's where New Mexico falls off. Is their defense isn't good enough to hang with Michigan State. Um, so I like Michigan State to come through here, but uh, it's tempting for me to take New Mexico just because craziness happens, and this would be a spot I could see New Mexico catches fire against Marquette and is just on one of those rolls where they're playing great all weekend and then dies off the next round. But it's one of those that also Michigan State could just flex on everybody here.
Yeah, we would have this Michigan State by 6.5, total of about 148. Interestingly enough, looking at this from my perspective, it looks like the model might be a little bit higher on New Mexico's defense and lower on their offense than you are with regards to how they're getting it done. So that would be a more a fun topic to dive into later. We're not going to dive into it now, of course, but when we get to that point, if this was the matchup, that could be some more things to talk about. So we have our Sweet 16 on that side. We will get us to a Final Four here: Auburn and Texas A&M. I think, Jake, for me, I'm going to preface this early in the show saying this. When I think about the number ones, we talked about already, they're so much better than everybody else. How are we going to have any of these number ones lose? How are they all not going to make the Final Four? Because they should all make the Final Four. This isn't a year where this one has this injury or this one has this big weakness. I mean, these are the four best teams here, or like the year UConn had to be a number four, right? How are we going to get one of these teams to lose? I look at Auburn the same way I look at these other ones we talked about. We're really just looking at it saying, like, are we just going to keep advancing them forever? When do we stop? Is the answer now? What's your take?
Like I think the answer might be now. Um, if we're doing it because Texas A&M. Okay, Auburn. I can't remember how if they played or how it went off the top of my head at the moment, but Texas A&M and Tennessee aren't that different. Tennessee split with Auburn, um, and really should have went 2-0 against Auburn. They've got athletic big guys. They've got I would consider uh, Stratford, whatever his name is, the fourth, uh, a better emergency type player than Lanier. Who You've got some guards that can really play on Texas A&M. We've got a very defensive, very physical team. Auburn has kind of tailed off here at the end of the year with the games they're losing because I mean, really, Ole Miss that they probably should have lost to Ole Miss and didn't even make it to Tennessee. Uh, we'll lose to Tennessee there. Texas A&M doesn't ever, we don't get to see that Tennessee matchup, but um, I feel like they're the exact same team, which kind of puts a hole in Auburn. And if you're going to have a one seed go down, I think this is a good place to have it. But at the
I,
same time, Auburn is also very, very good with a very,
oh,
very
oh,
good.
absolutely. I think you're going to feel like a fool if you're filling out a bracket and you're not putting all the ones into the Final Four. when they make it, whichever one, because you're going to be like, this team's so dang good. Why did I do this? Right? That's just the way it's. We just have to accept that, right? We have to live with it. But I love what you said there because number one, you linked Tennessee to A&M. Tennessee just got through beating Auburn. Tennessee lost the first time to Auburn in Auburn by 2. Texas A&M played Auburn once this year. It was in College Station, but won
Oh,
that
they
game by
won.
11.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about uh, some stylistic differences there, and a tough matchup. And that's what I said earlier, right? Unless you're picking all four to make the Final Four, which I don't think is
No,
as
not true.
crazy as it might be. It's there's a difference between what is likely and what's the most likely, right? I think all four ones making it is the most likely of all the contrived scenarios I can come up with. But that doesn't mean it is likely to happen, right? It's still only like whatever 15% or something. I don't know what the number is. Don't quote me on that. But it's still they're all so good, and so we're gonna have to figure out something like this. I like that we've got kind of at least a reason because otherwise it's just gonna be random. But we've got some ammunition here saying maybe Texas A&M, as Cousin Jared pointed out to us before, likes to hang in games, and then B, they hung in with Auburn the first time, already won. You already talked about the Tennessee angle, so a chance for them to pull it off. The model would have this as Auburn by about 7.5, and so from a betting standpoint, we would be seeing, hey, just could we get a bunch of points with A&M, which would align with our mo of fading A&M against Yale in the first round. Of can we get a lot of points against A&M, a team that can kind of just play an evenly matched game with anybody. Of course, now watch them; they're gonna win by 40 and lose by 40 because that's what happens. On the bottom half, we would have UNC against Michigan State. Jake, I'm not even going to ask you on this one because I cannot, out of principle, put that
No.
team in. But Michigan State here, this is our last team to talk about on here before A&M. Or do you want to just launch right into the A&M one? Because I don't. We're so far off on this play-in thing. I don't even know what's happening there
Yeah.
anymore in the bottom
Yeah.
half.
No. No. I'm. This is Michigan State. If this is the route that breaks for them, that's the dream route they would want.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We would have this Michigan State by about 3.5 in order to get to the Final Four. A low total here in the low 130s, which I don't think would surprise anybody, especially knowing that a trip to the Final Four is on the line. This game might not get to 130 if it were to happen. If it were to happen, Model would lean Michigan State. Would you advance Michigan State to the Final Four, or would you advance A&M?
This is one of the hardest picks I've had because Buzz Williams, like Izzo's gotten it done, and Buzz Williams never has. Um, I I came into the year really high on A&M. I think I'm going to stick there and lower on Michigan State. I think it like the defense aspect of it, um, and if for this matchup, I mean, guarding the 3 point line kind of really, if Michigan State goes colder, then they go back to looking how they did when they lost a few, and that is a very physical team they're going against. That could in the second round, second of the weekend game, that could really take some legs off of you, especially if we happen to be wrong on UNC and if that's Iowa State. That could be a totally different way of losing your legs. Or if we're right and it's UNC, that is an up and down game that might leave you gassed a little bit. That then coming through like the opposite styles of where they would have to go through with Iowa State and UNC to Texas A&M is a hard thing to game plan for.
And I feel like both of those teams, North Carolina, Iowa State, they come at you hard. That's the thing, really. It's different ways, but it's hard. I mean, it's not. You aren't getting out of those either playing either one of those teams feeling great the next day. With North Carolina, the way that they are just so athletic and get up and down the court, and then Iowa State, that suffocating defense. I mean, you're feeling it in different ways, but you're still feeling it the next day. I feel like playing those two teams, folks. The one thing I will say is we have put ourselves in quite a precarious scenario because we're taking Yale and 7.5 points in the first round, but if we advance A&M too far, now we are rooting for a very small window. So that's something to consider too with your brackets, especially if you're sports betting. Do you want that torture or not? If you do and you think it's right, as I do here, I think moving A&M forward makes a lot of sense, especially if we think they are a type of team who can beat Auburn. You're more likely to that team also be able to carry it forward, as opposed to, not to say that Michigan State or Iowa State or whatever couldn't beat a team like Auburn, but now you're almost picking more randomly between who's going to escape all of that versus saying we think we've got a team who could topple the best team, and that makes them kind of an interesting pick. But because we've taken the points with Yale, we're gonna have to think of a strategy of how to deal with that come whatever day this is. 3:20, 7:25 p.m. Eastern. How are we gonna handle our emotions in this moment?
I feel bad rooting for Texas A&M either way. And with this, like
Yeah,
you're rooting against the upset in the first week, and then you're if we're right and UC San Diego does it, you're rooting against probably the best story in the tournament. So it's not you're not going to feel good about A&M till they beat Auburn.
you know, and I'm kind of okay with that because Mrs. Professor tells me all the time that I have no soul because I will bet against and root against my own teams or for them if that's appropriate, either one. And that's just kind of it's kind of that like if you either die the hero or live long enough to be the villain. I feel like at this point with all the sports stuff, I feel like sometimes you gotta just be the villain,
Yeah,
and sometimes that's the person who makes the money. You know,
like
uh,
overs are fun, but unders will make you a lot of money too.
exactly, exactly. Well, very well said. We'll move over to the East now. Uh, Duke and Baylor. We'd have this Duke by about 10-ish. Right now, there's obviously questions with Cooper Flag. That's going to be the big question throughout the whole tournament. Really, my question for you is can Baylor hang in this? And as a Baylor alum, I didn't want to talk about them as much previously. I thought there was a great discussion about Mississippi State that you had with them. It, it, I've seen them have moments where they look so good, and you think they can hang with anybody. And I think you saw that against Texas Tech in the Big 12 tournament with what Tech did, and they had the ball at the end of the game to win it. And that was just an incredible feat. But yet they've also had so many disappointing moments this season, even aside from the injuries, that it feels like I don't know what to expect from Baylor, even on day one. Mississippi State could easily win that game. I don't think either one of them's defeating Duke. So really, the only question is, can either one of these teams, Mississippi State or Baylor, hang with Duke? And if so, which one has a better chance of pulling an upset between the two of them? If we kind of assume Duke's going to win either way.
I think Baylor has the better chance based on history, right? You've got Jeremy Roach, who's going to know most of that program inside and out, coaches and stuff, and then Norchad O'Meara has gone against Duke enough to know how that feels. Even though it's not the same team, but he's seen Shire, he knows how that goes. Roach has seen Shire. I mean, Scott Drew's a great coach.
Yeah.
I just the difference in the game will be Duke's freshmen are better than what Baylor's offering there with Flag, Knipple, and Malawak, and then you're bringing off Evans off the bench, who was the reason Duke beat Auburn when they beat him. He hit 6 threes in the first half, and he's shooting better now than he was then. With or not better, but with more confidence and more often. And Patrick Nagoba coming off the bench too is a totally different game player than Malawak. So it's just hard to game plan for a team that's as good as Duke, and then you add in the size where I think the only guy that's under 6'6" is the 5'9" walk on. So it's just unfortunate for whoever runs into him right now. I think and they're playing as a buzzsaw, but it wouldn't shock me endlessly if Baylor won the game though.
I mean, I will be pulling hard for that. I don't think it's overly likely personally. I think that this Baylor team is built perfectly to overperform in March based off of what they did in the regular season, based off of the talent they've got, the freshman who's been phenomenal, and like you said, some of those transfers, and Scott Drew, who's one of the best coaches in the country. We're so blessed to have him at Baylor. Um, and yet, this is like the toughest matchup they could have drawn. It'll be half a home game for Duke. I mean, they're one of the teams that's getting half home court for this round, given where the games are being played, and uh, all that said is like, yeah, but it doesn't. It's still the worst possible matchup, especially if Cooper Flag's healthy. If he's healthy, that team's just on a different level. It's not just the number. I mean, they are just by far and away the best team in the country, and it's scary how good they are. So we'll talk how Duke can be beat, aside from a Cooper Flag injury, as we progress them further. But this one, I think, is I hope Baylor can play, and they've got some pieces, but there's just a lot of inconsistency. So moving them too far in the bracket isn't crazy. I still think some of these 8-9s might be interesting survivor pool picks. Not that I pick Baylor in that either, but just kind of things to consider as you're listening here. The 5-4, Oregon and Arizona. This one's pretty straightforward for me in that I look at Could Oregon beat Arizona? Absolutely. Um, do I feel more confident Arizona's going to be there? Yes. And so because I feel Arizona's more likely to be there, I have to move them forward out of pure principle. And that's all there is because I don't want to take a team forward. I think might get upset. And Oregon, I don't really know what's going to happen against Liberty. So we're going to take Arizona here. Jake, I know you were already talking about not being high on Oregon, but what are your thoughts here as we put them to rest?
My fear with Arizona is Caleb Love shooting them out of a game. Um,
Yes, when we get good Caleb Love, I feel like you have to love watching it. It's
yeah,
great, and yeah, then you get the, the jacking up threes, Caleb Love, and just the reckless,
he's almost one of the players that I would have played in my past that I'll let him make his first shot.
just so
So
he
that
starts getting overconfident and doing
yeah,
crazy
because
stuff.
like if he's on, you're not beating him anyway.
Yeah,
But if
it's
he's
true.
overconfident and shooting stupid shots, and you can force him into some bad looks, and like as sloppy as Arizona is sometimes with the pace they play, they're very beatable. Um, and Altman isn't like it's not unfamiliar with
Yeah,
Arizona,
yeah,
like in their coaching and all that. And they're basically probably very familiar with this exact team.
yeah.
Uh,
Played last year. A lot of these guys are the same. There's a few differences,
yeah,
but
so it's like
these coaches
it
have
wouldn't
matched up for
if Oregon
years.
made it here. It wouldn't shock me if Oregon won this game.
Yeah.
I still think Arizona's the better team and more likely to win. But the fear is Caleb Love hits his first two shots and then goes 2 for 19 or something crazy.
Yeah, yeah. For now, we'd have this at Arizona by 4.5. Again, that's kind of assuming that each team plays about the same level of goodness, say in the first round.
Yeah.
Total in the upper 140s. I think it would be a really fun game, and a former Pac-12 matchup is always fun. And unlike you, like I said, I wouldn't shock me if Oregon wins. We'd have them winning about a third of the time, maybe a little bit more. But it's really just more about I feel more likely Arizona's going to get here. So from a probability standpoint, the probability you make it to the Sweet 16, it's simple math. It's the probability you win the first game times the probability you win the second game. Well, if the second game is about the same across your options, but the first game is very different, that makes your answer really simple. So this is pretty basic, sound mathematical strategy here to make sure you have a good bracket. Doesn't mean that you should pick Arizona here. It means if you, like us, are like, I feel much more confident in Arizona winning this first game, that makes a really compelling play to then move them on to the next one. Your expected values can be a lot higher. BYU and Wisconsin already advanced Wisconsin, as I mentioned on the first show, as to why I was doing that, had more to do with BYU, the same thing, not knowing about them, not knowing who would come out of that first game. Not that I overly love Wisconsin, but thinking maybe there's some of this mountain thing, maybe not. Jake, my question for you: Wisconsin, are they going to be rooting for BYU or VCU? We think Wisconsin will win; they're big favorites. Who would they rather play?
I think they'd rather play BYU.
Okay.
Um, Pace being more comfortable than what the game they just lost was. And I think you're more worried about if you hit BYU here, is it because they were hot? And if they're hot, they're very hard to beat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you get BYU because VCU just didn't have it and BYU really didn't look that good, I think you'd
Altitude,
feel a
legs,
lot better.
whatever.
Yeah, feel a lot better there. It's just you don't want to see VCU on. I don't think if I'm Wisconsin, I don't want to see VCU coming off an upset where they control the game and they're going to come and do the same to you. That's
Mm,
going to be tough because at that point you've got any BYU fans that stayed around. They're now probably cheering for VCU, cheering for the upset because it feels better for the team to make it out that beat you than them to get beat in the next round. And any Montana fans left over,
yeah,
and any, like they're all uh, fans are leaning their way, and then you also get there's history with VCU doing this kind of stuff.
right. Uh, Kind of on the same part of the bottom. I'm going to advance Alabama for the same
Yeah,
purpose of I just don't really feel like I know what's going to happen in that 7-10, so it's just not really worth picking the upset there. Couple questions for you here, Jake. First off, we've already talked about this with the matchup situation and everything. This is so fascinating. This trio of teams, we're just going to assume that Alabama gets it by poor Robert Morris. You weren't a 16, so congrats. But, between the St. Mary's Vanderbilt Alabama trio, I just think it's a fascinating trio. How does one of them really figure out a way to get past this weekend? Like, who's going to be able to do what they need to do, and what is that? Because there's just so many ways I can see this playing out.
St. Mary's has got to. if it is St. Mary's and like here, they have got to be so self confident that like because it is going to be extremely hard to not play Alabama's pace when you play that, and you see that like they get moving and they get going, and then all of a sudden you feel like you've got to because they hit two, three threes in a row, got a big dunk, the gym's rocking because like they're very athletic, very fun, and you missed your shots or you turn the ball over, and all of a sudden you feel like you've got to start yanking to get. You've got to be confident enough to know, nope, I got to play my game plan so like and keep this at my pace where I'm comfortable to play and make them uncomfortable by that. And I've not seen St. Mary's pull that off very often. They typically, if they're at home and they're comfortable, they play their pace. If they're on the road when they play Gonzaga, which is the closest team to this, they play Gonzaga's pace. That and then Vandy wants to play the same, not the same exact pace, but same style up beat. And I mean they'll hang with them for a while, but then all that Bam will pull away. Like if Vandy wins, like I think they will, Alabama is walking into the next round. If it's St. Mary's, that's where it gets interesting. And who like if they get the confidence enough, they can do it. But I don't see it very likely.
Yeah, Alabama, of course, is a really good team. That's why I made the comment. To me, they're a dark horse team that you got to think about
Yeah.
if you are in a bracket with
Straight chalk on this side.
a lot of people. Yeah, I'll talk on this side for sure. But I was definitely going to come back and say like you did, if it is Alabama Vanderbilt, of course they won that first game, and Alabama just probably still scoring points to be honest in that one. They put up over 100 and had no problem there against them. To me, that matchup would just be so fascinating. The contrast in pace there. You know, St. Mary's wants to play this game at about 1:30, and Alabama wants to play it at
Where they
I don't
score.
know. Yeah, I was like, can you name a number? Like, I think they'd be happy at 170, but if you said 270, they probably would sign up, right? Like, they'd probably be like, yeah, let's do it. Like, and so it's just such a contrast here. We would have Alabama by about 5.5, and we'd probably just put the total kind of in the middle in the 145 to 150 range. But I mean, anything is possible in the total in that one, as you talked about. But Bama, probably about a 2 out of 3 winner there against St. Mary's, and maybe even higher than that, like you said, against Vanderbilt. So straight chalk here. We were just talking about them. Let's stick with them. Wisconsin, Alabama, two teams that kind of got advanced by default here. Uh, Bama is going to be the better team and the favorite here. Are we comfortable sticking with the chalk and taking Bama, assuming it happens to be a chalk Sweet 16, which I know people complain about, but let's be honest. Sometimes the 1-4-3-2 Sweet 16 makes for some really good and fun basketball.
Yeah. I mean, well, this is you want this if you like good basketball. Like
Yeah.
you don't want as great of a story is if like on the opposite side you got UC San Diego making it through there, them getting Auburn, you're just looking at a massacre because you've got a full week game plan against them,
It
and
it would be like that year at St. Peter's had they
yeah,
run, and then whoever it was they went up against, it was just like was a buzzsaw, and it was like that was cute and all, but
yeah,
like
but
man, you're
yeah,
just
this is
way up against it here when you met your match.
yeah, yeah. It's too bad that wasn't Purdue that pulled that off because Purdue that was wild. Anyway,
Yeah.
Alabama like this is tough because the teams that Alabama struggled with aren't Wisconsin esque. Like like Wisconsin is good, but like if you want to look at the last half of the year, you had all the loss. Alabama lost to Auburn, Missouri, Tennessee, and Florida, and then Florida. Um, that is just like those teams are very very like top tier teams, except for Missouri. That one's a little questionable. But you're looking at the top tier teams that are the ones that got them, and Wisconsin's not been that all year. They already had a hard time playing two great games back to back. Do you think they can be? I don't think they could do that there. Like it's going to be tough, especially when their offense is really dependent on Tanji being on, and then everybody playing off that. Where you've got a good defense that plays fast that has multiple options. Like there was I think what was it, the Auburn game Alabama won at Auburn. Uh, Sears was bad. He did not play
Mhm.
well, but they get to the overtime, and then all of a sudden he's found his game again. And
Yeah.
Wisconsin just doesn't have the depth to fight Alabama.
Yeah, we'd have Alabama by about 4.5. A total in this one flirting with 170, which for a tournament game and the models knowing this is a tournament game, neutral site, that would be, I don't know how many times, I'm sure it's happened, but I don't know how many times I've seen a total of 170. I'm sure someone could query that for me and find out, but it would be a very high total. A lot of Alabama games would, unless it's against St. Mary's, of course. But yeah, they're obviously the stronger team and more likely to make it. Jake, let's loop back around to Duke. And we hadn't talked about it yet, so let me straight up ask: how does Duke lose? What type of team is going to beat Duke? And how important is the Cooper flag to that, or is the formula kind of going to be the same with or without him?
I think the formula is the same with or without him. It's just how hard is it to do. You've got to be. If you look at Duke's losses this year, you've got to be shooting well. Like Kentucky got him early, um, and I mean Kentucky's a great shot, a great shooting team. Um, you like Clemson was on and hitting them like it does. I don't just mean threes. Like you've got to be shooting a high percentage of whatever you're doing on offense, and at the same time, you can't make dumb plays. Like Duke is good enough this year that, not that you have to play perfect, but it's like UConn a couple years ago where it is going to be you've got to catch them not doing something well, and you have to be good at that, what they're not doing well. And it's just hard to do. Arizona actually is a team that, if I'm Duke, I'm a little bit nervous of because of they
Hmm.
play at that fast pace. Duke doesn't really want to play at that fast pace. They want to make you guard their offense and let Cooper Flag kind of ISO and make some decisions there. Um, there also can be a very good shooting team with Caleb Love and the other guards. Also, you've got a big meaty guy with a Waka down low that is not the big guys that really. I mean, Nagoba kind of, but he's just now coming on. But and Malik Brown being out, probably out. I would venture to say he's out. Um, it changes that defense and makes him a little like Malawak's not as offensively talented, or can only really guard the five position that well, and that he's a skinny guy. So like Arizona is the kind of team that would match up to beat him. But you're always gonna be live and die by Caleb Love. If he's on, he's on. It's hard to beat him. If he's off, it's just unfortunate.
You froze. I don't know if you're frozen on your end or not, but you're frozen on my end.
I don't know what happened. It just
Oh,
dropped. Like
you're
it's not
back.
like my internet. It's not like my internet died. Like I still had internet. It just dropped. My laptop dropped my internet.
Weird. No, that's fine. Do you remember roughly where you were about when that happened?
I have no clue when it dropped.
Okay, I would say then go back to like trying to think of what the last part I heard was. You were talking about how teams had to do really well at what they were doing. You mentioned the Clemson game. Um, you mentioned that you were a little scared of Arizona because their tempo
I mean,
and
I
how
can
they
just
want
pick
to
up
get.
I can just pick up at Arizona. It's fine.
Yeah, you wanted to get Cooper Flag isolated. That was the last thing I heard.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just pick up with
So I'd
Arizona.
say pick up from around there, and then I'll splice it together.
Yeah. All right. Oh, give me a stupid notification here. I don't care what screen. I don't care. Okay. I think Arizona is a bad matchup for Duke. Like I think it's maybe not in the sense that Arizona's definitely will win, but um, the tempo Arizona plays, plus they can be very good shooting. They've got a very meaty guy that I love and wish was still at Tennessee, Toby Awaka, big, strong, big guy that is the opposite of what Duke really pulls out. This is where Malik Brown injury really shows up. And not like for them to not be, to counteract the tempo that Arizona has because Malawak is not guard-ish at all. I don't know that he can really guard any of the guards that Arizona's going to be able to throw out. So switching on him is going to be tough, and then Awaka should be able to move him where he needs him on the rebounds. Because I mean, like Arizona, you're going to live and die with Caleb Love. That was the contract you signed when you brought him in,
Yeah.
and if he's on, it's going to be tough. And there's familiarity there on both sides with him. Uh, I just it's going to be so tough to beat Duke because you've got to be doing well what they are not doing well in whatever game they're playing, and you've seen that with the Kentucky and Clemson games, and they're I forget who else they lost to, but it's one of those that it's very hard to beat them, and it should be because they're very talented, but they're not infallible. They've got Achilles heels with like they don't do well with great tempo. That's not what they want to do. They can do it for spurts, but it's not what they want to do all game. The depth is there, but it's like abundant in a couple positions, and I think center is like five guy is one of the positions that they're very thin in because Nagoba was brought in as an offensive prospect. He's not a defensive powerhouse, so you might see zone, and if you get Duke into the zone, then you know you've got them kind of scared of what's happening. And Arizona's the team to do that, but I don't think they're pulling this off.
Duke would be about a 7.5 point favorite right now. Again, the whole Cooper Flag thing looms large. Jake, this will be the second weekend. What is your projection? I know you're not a medical doctor, and exact extent of these things, right? How much are we being led in to know the exact, right?
Yeah.
So I know you're not going to be perfect on this. I'm just, look, what are we thinking here? Because that's so important as you're thinking about, you know, are you comfortable moving Duke into the Final Four, knowing that this looks like a tough region for them. I mean, for being by far the best team in the country, and still maybe the best team even without their best player, to match up with a team like Baylor, who again I think they will handle, but like that's not really the most fun thing to do with that talent, Scott Drew, and then maybe Arizona like this, or if it's Oregon, a coach like Dana Altman, or like you said, Alabama, which sounds exactly like what Duke doesn't want to do. So knowing how we feel about Cooper Flag, I think has to matter for what could be 2 or 3 really tough Duke matchups in a row here before they even make it to San Antonio.
Yeah, I would think they would move on if Cooper's playing, because I mean, there's the Grant Nelson question that we really hadn't addressed with Alabama if he's going to be back fully healthy and all that. Um, that matters in the last game. I don't think it matters in either of the first two, but
No.
um, Grant Nelson is more important to Alabama in that game than Cooper Flag would be to Duke because Con Knipple, if he was not playing on Duke with Cooper Flag, everybody would be talking about. I mean, the guy, I don't know that he hit a three in the last game. He scored 20 points. He was the ACC tournament MVP, and the only story you're hearing out about Duke is if Cooper Flag's back. This guy would be getting all the love anywhere else because he's fantastic. He's a huge matchup prone because I think he's 6'6", 6'7", shoots the light out of the ball, daylights out of the ball, and can drive, makes good decisions. Um, I think the size really helps Duke against Bama because Proctor's going to have a huge height advantage on Sears, and they seem to be a lot stronger. If Alabama's on, they're hard to beat, but there's been times that they go, like the Tennessee game is a perfect example. Alabama should have put Tennessee away. What the, and def. All right.
You
We're
cut out there for a second. I caught
cool.
if Alabama's on, they're hard to beat. So just pick
Yeah.
up from if Alabama's on,
So
they're hard to beat.
if Alabama's hard on, they're hard to beat, and like, but you've seen it in the Tennessee. Like the Tennessee game is a perfect example. They should have put that game away, but because of the pace they play, they don't know how to like slow like put a game away. And with Duke, you've got to be able to put him away. That's never been Nate's a strong suit because of the kind of game he wants to play, and I think that will make him very vulnerable against the Duke team who has come back from like I think being down 10 3 or 4 times this year to win the game. Like Alabama would have to do something counterintuitive for them at the end of that game if they're not blowing Duke out. And I think that just limits how far that Alabama team will always go under Nate Oates.
Is But is Cooper Flag going to play next week, and is he going to be 100%? That's the question that we have to
I,
ask. And,
I
and, and
think
how do we feel about that?
I think he does. I mean, the way he was walking in, unless he was extremely practiced, there wasn't a hitch in the giddy up. Um, the thing you worry about is this first game shaking the rust off. But I think by the Baylor game,
And
he's
you're
going
always more likely to re-injury the first game
yeah,
back. Like that's just there's no way around that. It just is
yeah,
what it is.
and he's going to feel like it'll be loose. I mean, everybody out there sprained an ankle before. You know that first time after you've been off for because he'll be off about a week. It is stiff and everything getting it back. But by that second game, if you've played in some tournament where you played back to back or even days off in between, you feel so much better because you've been on it and you're past the mental part of I can trust it. So that I think Baylor gets the bad end of Cooper Flag, and then that just rolls forward.
That figures. Um, if Arizona can pull the upset, because I think that we're kind of in agreement here. Bama's a little more likely to pull the upset because they're just better. Both teams could. Both teams are kind of tough matchups for Duke. If Cooper Flag's 100%, you don't think they're losing to anybody because they're basically what UConn was a couple years ago when we said they aren't losing to anybody, and that was simple enough, right? So yes, that. But however, if a team gets hot and accidentally, and Arizona's a team that could do it, like you said, with Caleb Love, who's the perfect guy to have that because would you put Caleb Love on a team that's one seed? No, you wouldn't want that high variance. But if he can make the Sweet 16, you absolutely want him because you need that high variance because you aren't as good as most of these other teams here. So Arizona pulls the upset. Let's pretend over Duke and then plays Alabama. First off, that would be a fun game. A lot of these would be fun games. How would you see that one playing out? Because that's the one I kind of want to talk about here. Just in the something with weird with Duke happens. If not, like you said, Duke can kind of just is so good. They probably are just they're gonna make it right. So let's talk about a matchup for without Duke, Arizona, Alabama. What you got?
And this is a duel, right? It is an absolute duel to be back. It's just going to come down to who's making. This seems so simple. Who's making the shots and who's not?
Yeah.
Because both teams play the same style. They both are relatively. Well, Alabama's probably better defensively, but I don't like I just said. I think Alabama struggles to put teams away, and I don't think Arizona has as much of a struggle because they've shown to be able to play a little bit slower when they need
Mhm.
to, and
Mhm.
it just
They've
made
played a
it.
lot of slower games than
Yeah,
Bama. Bama just doesn't know how to do it.
yeah,
Arizona at least has done it.
yeah. That's the point I was trying to make. Like Nate Oates has, like you'll see him struggle in these kind of games. Like the Tennessee one is a perfect example. Auburn broke right for him with the right guys making the right shots at the right times, but it's just the ability to get your team to play a little bit different than Arizona has. I think I would favor Arizona in that matchup just because I like what they offer and like being able to change things up where you know exactly what Alabama's going to do. And like we said the whole time, if Alabama's on, they're almost impossible to beat. But um, can they do that for 40 minutes over 6 games or for over 6 games? Like that's tough. Or does it turn out to be 20 minutes in the Wisconsin game and then not, and then they don't make it in the second half, or like in this Elite Eight game, do they come out for 15 minutes and they look unbeatable and then can't find like the rim? It's I don't know.
I,
I
I, I
don't trust
love
Alabama enough.
I love talking about this region. I want to keep talking about this region,
Yeah,
and that's not just because Baylor's in it. But you mentioned NATO to Alabama, and I'm thinking as a Baylor football fan, we saw this for years under previous regime that when they would get up sometimes by 3 touchdowns, you didn't necessarily know if the game was over. I went to a Cotton Bowl where that happened against Michigan State. They're up 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and lost. They just didn't know how to finish it because they had one speed and one gear and one thing they could do. And if that kind of then, if something went wrong, if it went right, it was great. And they would just run over everybody. But it's like, if then something went wrong, you couldn't adjust and pivot and change, and you're all of a sudden your quick style turned into quick three and outs, and your defense is tired back on the field. And that's the same thing in basketball, right? If you're taking quick threes and you're missing them, what happens? Now you're running back the other direction. Their team's got a great chance, right? Especially those long rebounds. So it's the same kind of thing where that can hurt you. We're gonna move Duke forward here. I'm under the, you know, this is the closest I've seen to that dominant UConn team from a couple years ago. Is this Duke team? It's very similar, and unless I hear anything different, I'm just gonna treat them the same way, which is I'm giving them every benefit of the doubt, even if these might be tougher matchups, even if they'd rather play St. Mary's and Wisconsin and whoever else. I still think they're just really that good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that UConn team had going for them that this Duke team, I think the field is much better this year than
Mhm.
UConn's field. Um, so I
That's
think
true.
like the fact that like Alabama's as good as they are, and I mean Arizona has the
It,
talent,
it,
and
it it's almost like this year, like that year, maybe UConn was as good as this Duke team, but that year didn't have also Houston
yeah,
and Florida and Auburn. It
yeah,
was just then the drop to the next, and now you've got a couple of those other teams that have risen the whole field.
yeah, yeah. That's yeah, exactly. The
Yeah.
UConn team was
Whereas
just a
that year
perfect
Bama might have
storm of
had to be a
them.
one.
Yeah.
No, and it would have changed anything. We're gonna move down to the bottom part of the bracket here and go to the West, Florida and UConn. Jake, this is going to be an interesting one. I don't. I think we talked about how can we get one seeds out? Not that we don't want them to advance, but we want to be leery of we've already gotten one out, but we want to be leery of putting all four in, maybe not even three. How can Florida lose? One way they can lose is to a team like UConn, who has the pedigree and has the coaching. The question is just, do they have the horses to really hang in there, or is Florida over 40 minutes just going to be too strong? And this isn't really an upset you'd consider.
This is one I've been thinking about for a while, like since the bracket came out. Because
I
Florida's lost.
figured it'd be one people talk about and think about for sure.
Yeah, like Florida is lost in some weird ways, right? The Kentucky game was just unreal. I don't remember if that one went to overtime, but I know like 106-100 is just a ridiculous game no
Yeah.
matter what. Then like Missouri 83-82, those are both higher scoring games. Then they get blown out by Tennessee at Tennessee, going scoring 44 points, and they lose to Georgia at Georgia by 3 points. Like it's really Condon really hasn't had the year that I thought he would. I mean he's been good, don't get me wrong, but I thought he would be the star of this team, kind of one that makes it go. But it's actually Walter Clayton Jr. Um, if he's going and Richard is making threes, like when they pulled away from Tennessee in the SEC tournament, those stretches were Clayton making the right decisions, Richard Richards or one of the other guards hitting a three, or Condon and Hall, like they're so deep. The issue becomes, do you have enough bodies? And Tennessee was running out of that. I don't know if UConn's got the bodies, but they've definitely got a coach that can figure it out. And they've got some stud players with Liam McNeely and Caravan and all that, and everybody else they've got going there. That if they're playing well, Florida could be in trouble. But honestly, the way Florida's playing right now, I'm not sure that I'm taking them out of the tournament ever.
They're out west, which is not ideal for them.
Yeah,
Not that that matters for this team, of course, but when you talk about just going through things, and of course, even if they were out west, it wouldn't have mattered for you anyway. So it's kind of an interesting, situation always to see how they do this. Right? Would they have put Houston out west, knowing that they're about the same distance, maybe a little bit further away, but not by much. And that way you could have someone else not quite so far across the country. The things that they have to figure out. But that's going to be one of the big question marks I think that people would have if it wasn't for the fact that when you look at this draw for them, St. John's is going to be up against the same thing. Tech's going to be a little closer, but not by much. Maryland's up against the same thing. Memphis, I mean, I don't trust Memphis to win four
yeah,
games in a row at all. So it's kind of an interesting setup here with how little West teams out there. They did not do the thing where they put like a strong three or a strong two out there. That was from way out there. So I think you're right with everything you said there. We're going to have to move UConn forward, of course, Florida forward, of course, as they are really good. And we'll talk more as we go
What
along with just
now? UConn wins this game, and you're gonna be like, "Ah, I said it, and I should have stuck
I
with
said it. I said it exactly right. And we'll talk about how Florida can lose as we move forward. But Maryland Memphis would be a really fascinating game here. For me, this is a clear cut. I'm taking Maryland from consistency standpoint, and the consistency doesn't even have anything to do with this one game. Yes, I think Maryland is a more consistent team, and that makes them probably more likely to win this game. But as we talked about before, it makes them more likely to get to this game. Part of that's also their opponent. Not that we don't love Grand Canyon, but Colorado State is a better team. But part of it's just I just never know what I'm going to get from Memphis from game to game. So they're not a team I could advance that far. That aside, because let's say it is these two teams. What's the difference? Because if they make it here, now we're past the whole high variance part, and that just means Memphis might win by more or lose by more. But we know that with Memphis anyway, that's not really breaking news. So aside from that, what would you see playing out if we did get this 4-5?
uh, where I worry is the inside part. Like Maryland is top five is as good as anybody's. You could almost put out there. Really, um, it's the depth of that. Memphis isn't going to beat them on depth, and I think like even if Hunter's back, like how back is he in the second game? And
On the second, yeah, yeah.
you've also got a great like people forget Willard was an exceptional coach who probably had a team that was going to be a one seed and had a good chance to win it. Seton Hall the COVID year, and then he's at Maryland and that all that happens. But man, like I really like Willard in this scenario to especially take Memphis apart. I think Memphis is an easy team to pick apart if you need to, but this is going to hang over Maryland's head. That depth issue is going to be a monster, and any foul trouble that happens, all of a sudden you're taking huge weapons out and replacing them with water guns. Like it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and we would have this at Maryland by 8 points or so. Um, that is, of course, the thing to keep in mind as you have mentioned, with their lack of depth and how they're going to lose. Is this a situation where that lack of depth might make me not trust the model as much or not be quite as confident in them as much or things like that? This isn't really the matchup for that anyway. So if it were to be this matchup, we'd still be looking to like Maryland, aside from my earlier logic. So just a double strength there. While we're here in this top part, though, I will go ahead and just advance Florida because I think it's a pretty quick and simple discussion here. In that, like we talked about with the depth, I mean, that's going to be just a terrible matchup for Florida. Location wise, it's going to be terrible location for both of them, so that's not going to change anything. And so, I mean, yes, you could argue maybe Maryland's gone out there more because the one random West Coast road trip they did, but that's ridiculous. At this point, Florida's going to be the much better team to be massive favorites, so we'll move them forward. To the bottom half, Drake and Tech. Drake is one of the only double digit I think we advanced besides UC San Diego beyond tens. And I think all the tens we're going to have losing. Do we advance Drake here to the Sweet 16? They're going to be a hot team for people picking them to do that. Or even though Tech might not be sexy, do we just say they're so consistent and why do we want to overthink this? How are we seeing that one?
This is testing me because I want to pick Drake, but I've been a big Texas Tech supporter all year. I love Grant McCaslin, JT Toppin. They've got some weaknesses, and I think Drake can take advantage of them. Um, Man, this one I really don't know. Like, and the ones that I don't know, I tend to lean towards a more defensive focused team, and I think that might be Drake. Because I think, but I don't know. What's the model saying? Because I don't have this one.
We've got this at Tech -6. I think the fun one on this one is the total right now would be about 123, which would be very, very low and probably accurate. For me in the bracket, I think this one's pretty simple. And so your take on the game, I think, is interesting and kind of makes me think, too, if you were getting 6 points with Drake, you probably would be thinking about that or a stab on the money line. But for me, this one goes back to some of the logic we talked about earlier. And it's chalky, and so people aren't going to think that's sexy. But the probability that Tech makes that game is just so much higher. I love Drake. I think they're a real fun story, and they absolutely can make a deep run because they're unique pace and how good they are on defense just could do anything for them. But because if they completely go cold, Missouri, could easily win that game. I don't want to be picking a Drake team to go further on than this. It's not going to matter too much. I really like the St. John's team,
Yeah.
and we're going to move them on to Florida. The only question before we get to what would be an epic Florida St. John's game is for you if St. John's is playing a Tech, a Drake, a Missouri, or whatever, what type of team might actually give them some problems that you'd be worried about, either from them advancing or covering? Because we love them covering. We've said they're underrated for quite some time now. Is there anyone there that you're like, I'm worried about them, or you think we're kind of good just rolling with St. John's all the way?
I mean, the issue with St. John's is that style of play works until it doesn't. And
Mm,
so when you find some team that can really take care of the ball and isn't going to be a phase by your defense, breaks your press, and has some scores, like how does, because they don't really have the size to battle like that. And if you're breaking through that defense a little too easy and a little like and not giving them some live ball turnovers, they don't really create it on their own as much. But I mean, that's at the level they play at for the defense. It's very hard. I think honestly, I think there should have been a little bit more discussion about St. John's possibly being a one seed than. I
mm.
don't know if they deserved it or not. That's a different area, but I think their name should have been up there for what they were doing at the end of everything. Uh, Texas Tech to me is a hard matchup for them. I need to dive into the numbers a little bit more. I don't know them off the top of my head, but if
I was going
Texas
to say,
Tech,
you were talking about turnover per possession. They rank number 32nd out of course, 364. 32nd is good. It's not elite, but I mean, there are a lot of teams ahead of them that are in the tournament. So I mean, they do a pretty good job of holding on to the ball.
yeah, so that I mean that could be a bad matchup for them. Um, I don't know. I like St. John's to win it. I've been a big fan of them. I actually I love this matchup. That would be epic. With the Golden and going to get like one of the one of the more younger coaches probably in this tournament going against probably one of the oldest. That's kind of fun matchup to have there.
Drake, for the record, is 283rd in turnovers per possession. So if Drake were to make it to St. John's, that
Yeah.
seems like it could be a little bit of a problem. The team that we have them playing in the second round in Arkansas, 136, so more middle of the pack. If they play Kansas, and we didn't spend a ton of time, I feel like, talking about Kansas, but the fact that they are this overlooked seven seed is still kind of funny to me. We did talk about the Y earlier. They're 151st. So very similar to Arkansas, and then if it happens to be Missouri, who we did have losing early, but is still a really good team, they also would be a tougher matchup as they were 47th. So really, it does look like, unless it's Drake, uh, although Drake would be a fascinating matchup with regards to style clash. Uh, Tech or Missouri could give them problems. Of course, the other team that can give them problems, number 38 in turnovers per possession, right in the same area as Tech and Missouri, is Florida. So it's not like Florida is going to really play into their hands there, which I think for me is at least why we've got to move Florida forward. Also, St. John's to me is that type of team, a little bit like Alabama. I'm just a little hesitant moving them too far because they do seem like that team that kind of can lose to anybody if the matchup doesn't go their way. And unfortunately, in a bracket challenge, you don't always know what matchup is going to be presented to you. Uh, who can beat Florida, Jake? That's the question I have before we head
I
over to the
I
Midwest.
kind
What
of
type
like
of team?
I kind of like St. John's to do it, a high pressure kind of speed team, because I think if you look at the teams that beat uh, St. John's this year, like your Baylor Bears did it in a 99-98 game early on. Georgia got them a couple games later, 66-63. But then it's teams that want to go slower with Creighton and Villanova that take care of the ball and like win possession by possession and not try to go on runs. And both those losses that they had were one possession games in the Big East. After that, they handle everybody. I think Florida's at best when they're running and gunning, and that helps St. John's. If you play that fast, that style of defense, that is tough. Like, and I think Florida could very easily make a couple of mistakes. 'Cause, I mean, we saw Florida lose to Georgia in a game where Florida forgot to make free throws was really the biggest issue.
Mhm.
They shot like 60% from the free throw line. So you have something like that, and that matters in this game. Like we're getting two teams that you're splitting hairs anyway to figure out who's better. Um, you have that situation, or St. John's is shooting hot. Like I think you could have that in Maryland. Like Maryland could tag Florida if they're on. I mean, as good as Condon is and as deep as they are in the Ochewu or whatever. I mean, they're gonna have a hard time hanging out in the middle like they like to do with Derek Queen able to step out or Julian Reese and that. It's you're going to have to do something very well, and I think you're going to have to be comfortable playing at the speed that Florida plays at because they're going to be the better team every time they step on the floor, except for maybe one or two teams, and they're going to drive the pace. If you're comfortable playing that faster pace, I think you can stand a chance to pick parts of Florida off because, I mean, they did everything they could and let Tennessee back in that game when they should have been able to absolutely run through it with the foul trouble Tennessee had, and that's because they let off the gas at times. And Todd Golden's San Francisco teams had the same issue. They pulled back a little bit too early or something like that, and they let teams sneak back in. And St. John's is a team that you never says die because Patino's not
Yeah,
gonna let
you
them.
can't. Yeah, you can't do that with them. We would have St. John's by about 3 over Tech, Florida by about 4 over St. John's right now. Both of them in the 6 out of 10-ish times, maybe up towards 2/3. And so I'm going to move Florida on this part of the bracket, and I think it's not disagreeing with what Jake said there. Again, we're talking about bracket strategy, which is a little bit different, and that is that I think Florida is by far the most, the best overall team and the more consistent team, the team that's going to be more resilient to different types of matchups, that sort of thing, than St. John's. I completely agree with you. St. John's would be a tougher matchup for Florida because I think their pace is almost identical
Yeah.
according to my metrics, and so they're very fine playing that style. But it's just I'm a little bit more worried about something weird happening with St. John's. Or I'm
Mhm.
less worried about something weird happening with Florida, and so because I've got two really good teams, I'll just go with the one I think is more likely to have at least made it there and not lose points early.
I think it's
Houston and
wild that
Gonzaga.
Georgia has beat both these teams, and we're not picking
Oh
people to
yeah,
win their game.
I and well, and you mentioned, and the other thing too is you mentioned the St. John's Baylor game. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, yeah, that was that like super drunk game in the Bahamas that went double overtime that was played in that like ballroom where like this is like makes the whole Cowboy Stadium the punter can hit the scoreboard thing put to shame. Like guy did if you did a half court shot, you probably would have hit the ceiling. And yeah, that was I'd kind of forgotten that was the season, so you brought it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been a year. To the Midwest, Houston and Gonzaga in the second round would on Saturday. I mean, that would have to be CBS's dream. There, it's a matchup we would have clamored to see for how many years now. Houston finally mostly healthy, by far the healthiest I feel like Houston has been in a tournament in quite some time, probably back since the year after COVID that my Baylor Bears won and defeated Houston. I don't think they've been healthy since. I'm not even sure they were healthy then against the Gonzaga team, like we talked about earlier, a little bit disappointing. Can Gonzaga pull the upset? I know they can hang in there, but can they finish it off and play a full 40 against the Houston team that's really good? Or is this just a matter of time before Houston shows their dominance?
I kind of think the talent's there for Gonzaga to do it. I think this could be the worst matchup for Houston here because
Mm.
you've got an exceptional point guard in Nemhard. You've got big guys with Ike and Greg that can both step out, then spread out. That it's going to come down to Gonzaga turn the ball over enough, and does that Watson or one of their third guys step up and score enough to keep them in this game? Because the offense is there, the pace is there, the counters to what Houston likes to do. But once again, you're looking at a one seed who's going to be better than you at every step. It's can you counter enough to do? And also, it seems like Samson is just snake bitten in the tournament.
Mm.
Like it
I
seems,
was I was thinking that looking at this region, I'm like, I would have a hard time picking Houston to make it to the Final Four. It just seems like they can't get over the hump, even though they're so good every single year.
Yeah, it's one of those that uh, that like somebody feels like somebody's going to roll an ankle at the wrong
Mm,
time, or like
mm,
because Jamal Shed last year, right? Uh,
mm.
and it's just you can't replace a guy like that on the fly, and
It seems like it's been multiple guys
yeah.
every year
Oh yeah,
forever.
it's just, he seems snake
Crazy.
bitten, and it's unfortunate. Not that I'm counting on that to happen, but I think
No, this year it would just be someone's half court shot goes off of someone's head and bounces in or something, right? Like it would just be something weird, right? Because that's
no,
just what it's not going to happen, but that's just what it seems like is going to happen. I'm with you on
yeah.
that one.
Um,
Um,
so
I've got to pick Houston to
yeah,
advance here, just because the odds are so in our
yeah.
favor for the number one seeds.
Oh yeah,
That said, this feels a lot like a couple of years ago when TCU and
the TCU.
Memphis were both like 8, 9 seeds. And
Mhm.
we were like, a one seed might go down here. TCU, I think, played Gonzaga.
Yes,
Uh, Memphis, I don't remember who Memphis played. Uh, but it was a year ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was. Some of these games where it's like, you're going, this one could get interesting.
yeah,
And that's this one, of course. Gonzaga has tons of talent. We'd only have this Houston by 5 or 6, and that's usually a lot of times the spread on these 1-8, 1-9s is usually double digits. The only double digits you see usually on Saturday and Sunday are the 1-8, 1-9s, with the exception of the random one you can't predict. That's going to be like whatever, a 4-12 or something, or the 7-15 matchup. The weird, some of the weird, but of chalky stuff. This is
yeah.
the only one that's chalky that'll be double digits most of the time. We'd have half of that. So this isn't to say Gonzaga can't win. It's just saying, from a bracket strategy standpoint, I don't want to go out on a limb here. If you're in a pool with 1,000 people, it's not crazy.
Yeah. No,
It's not the
like this,
dumbest
the
thing in the world.
talent's there. There's a reason everybody thought Gonzaga was going to be good coming into the year, and it just
Yeah.
hasn't put it together.
And I know some people, and this is tough because the data is not crystal clear on this. We don't have enough time to look at it, and the methodologies have changed is the problem too. But we've seen this in college football too. Sometimes when you get to the end of the season, actually using a preseason rating is more valuable than the data that you have that season. And that sounds crazy to some, and it may not even be more, but sometimes it's valuable to add it in depending on the sport. I think in college football, it's like we found at times it's actually more. Basketball has enough data that it's never more, but it's useful to sometimes add it. Things that you wouldn't think make sense, but that preseason we all kind of thought Gonzaga was going to be really good. Not to say that that is definitive. It's just saying that sometimes that can really matter, right? Or the opposite of that can really matter. We've seen some of these trends too, where teams that are preseason unranked, and how bad they do in both college basketball and college football. So things to keep in mind here that we don't want to just throw that out. That Gonzaga's a really good team, but we just can't advance on past Houston. Clemson, Purdue, Jake. This is the first one of all these that I've seen. I feel like even the first round games we didn't have maybe one of these. We only had one or two. Really a true coin toss. 51-49 in favor of Purdue. Model thinks who the heck knows. So if the model doesn't know, what do you know?
I like Clemson here. I think they do everything just as well as Purdue does, and have a little more firepower than Purdue. I think it's all about Braden Smith, and he's kind of faded a little bit towards the end of the year. Purdue's coming in on not a great streak. I know they won the uh, first game in their tournament, but didn't look great the next night. Uh, didn't look great coming down the tail end of the year. I think Clemson's kind of a little bit on the opposite side. It's looked better as the year goes on. I mean, they've shown they've got the ability to absolutely handle anybody when they beat Duke, and really just kind of handled that game. Uh, they've got big guys that do well. They've got really good guards. They've got a pretty good coach, and honestly, I think they're a great counter to they're identical to Purdue in style and play, it feels like, but I think they're a little bit better. And then I think they're a great counter to what Houston does. And from not so much of a pace and offensive firepower standpoint, but I think where they're good is where Houston doesn't need them to be good. So I think pro that makes an interesting matchup to me.
That was gonna be a follow up. Is could either one of these teams beat Houston? Which
Purdue,
one has
no.
a better chance? So let me rephrase a little bit different since you already answered that question. The model would have Houston by about 9 over either Clemson or Purdue. You've already kind of indicated that even though the model would say 9 for both, that it may not be quite the same, that the Clemson should be shaded a little bit down because some of the styles, and maybe the Purdue shaded up a little bit, that you'd like Houston, that Houston might struggle a little bit more with Clemson. But let me ask you this instead. Does Clemson have a better or worse chance of pulling the upset than Gonzaga? Also consider first day of the Sweet 16 of that weekend versus the second game, if that matters. Who do you like's chances better to prevent Houston from going to the Elite Eight?
I like Clemson's chances better. I think they are just a. They don't do anything great, but they're just solid all the way around. And like I said, I think they counter what Houston wants to do more so. Like Gonzaga, it's like if everything goes right, they've got the firepower and the pace that make Houston a little uncomfortable. But they need a lot more to go right. Where Clemson, I think, can play their game, and just by playing their game makes Houston uncomfortable because they're not playing into Houston's hands because the speed Gonzaga plays at kind of plays into Houston's hands a bit. So I like Clemson in that matchup. I actually like Clemson to win it.
It will
But
be very interesting, the coaching chess match that Kelvin Sampson will have to do at
yeah,
Houston against a really good coach, in Mark Few at Gonzaga, and then like you said, against the tendencies and what Clemson's already trying to do, already presents a problem without being thinking about going up against a Hall of Fame coach. Uh, they're not that Kelvin Sampson isn't also a Hall of Fame coach, but it's not going to be necessarily the most fun path. I'm still moving Houston forward here rather than Clemson. I don't think I trust either of those teams in that pod to make it out of the first game, so I can't beat them
yeah.
against Houston. But I completely do see what you're saying. I think Houston's going to be an interesting point here for people's brackets, because how many people are going to pick Houston saying no one else is picking them and everyone's against them and they're good and it's their time? You don't win until you win, right? Every team hasn't won until they've won. And so everyone's like that with Gonzaga, and then Gonzaga won. And then, so how much versus how many people are just going to be like, no, this team's snake bit, I'm staying away. And so that's the interesting thing here when you're bracket. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure ESPN will have some stats. Unfortunately, I don't know if they'll have that before brackets lock, so but that's something maybe if you hear about or whatever that I think kind of matters. I'm a little bit inclined to go bolder on Houston. I am a little bit more contrarian because, in general, contrarian angles help you with sports betting. They help you with pool winnings and things like that. You kind of want to zig when other people zag. I tend to think people are going to be pessimistic on Houston, and this is the first time they're actually healthy. So I think they're going to do well, but I'm not that confident in it. So it's not like I'm, dying on that hill as much as I'm just saying. I think there might be a little bit of strategic benefit going there better on Houston, but if you have fears about them and the way they've been snake bitten and some of the ways they've fallen apart here, you know, don't don't advance them past where you feel comfortable.
Look, and it's very interesting if you run this out and Purdue wins that game because that is a home game for Purdue, big
And
time.
Indianapolis, yes.
Yeah, that also adding that in makes it like the thing is
And it would be probably with some Kentucky fans there. That's not too far of a drive here to Indianapolis.
yeah.
Or some Illinois fans. That's not too far of a drive to
Well,
Indianapolis. Or some Tennessee fans.
with
And
Houston,
all of them are going to be rooting against Houston
yeah,
probably
yeah,
because Houston's the number one seed.
with Houston having
So
the Midwest confused me when you had the West out there because that like every team they're going against is much closer in
they'd
the
almost
16.
rather be in the West
Yeah,
and say, we don't have other than the Gonzaga matchup. That might be the one counter to that, right? Leave
well, that
Gonzaga
wouldn't
out
be
in the Midwest.
that wouldn't be in the Indianapolis like that they ever make that.
Oh, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, so it's like you're really hamstringing them because everybody's going to be against them. And it's not like Houston has a huge alumni base. It's not tiny by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a tiny school, but it's not overly an overly proud history sport. I mean, they've had some basketball history too. I'm not trying to dismiss Houston. My parents lived there for many years and whatnot. I love the place, but it's I just don't think they're going to have a huge crowd presence there, especially if the other three teams end up being, like you said, like Purdue, Kentucky and Tennessee, you're going to have a lot of those three fan bases there. So some real interesting things happening there with Houston. Illinois, Kentucky on the bottom half of this bracket, a chance to go play really close to home. Uh, you know, both of these teams have shown signs of being really good and at times not. Kentucky coming from a better conference, is that enough for you to move them forward? How do you feel about these two teams from a variance standpoint? This feels like a great matchup. I'd be really looking forward to watch it.
It's an incredible matchup. Only God knows what's going to happen if we see this matchup because no clue how either of these teams look. Look, it matters. Health matters
We
here.
should see points, which is
Yeah.
fun. We'd have this projected total at 166.
If we're still dealing with Jackson Robinson injury and Lamont Butler injury, it's Illinois all day because that's just too many pieces to lose in too close of a game. Um, but if they're playing and they're feeling better and they're healthier going into this game, I think it's a true coin toss, and I'm probably going to pick Illinois just because the coach has done it more so than Pope has. But it would be one of the more fantastic Sweet 16 games to or round of 32 games to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. The model leans toward Illinois right now. Almost kind of like you were saying a little bit. I think it's kind of hedging its bets on some of the injury stuff and just saying we're going to lean Illinois. We don't know how much. So I'm gonna go Illinois just because you're gonna have to pick now before we know a lot of these things. If nothing else, I think I'm with you in that the inconsistency from Kentucky frustrates me more than anything else. And maybe I just haven't watched enough Illinois basketball. I'm sure there's someone who's in the comments who's going to tell me how Illinois basketball can be just as frustrating. But I feel like I've seen Kentucky be frustrating enough that if I know I picked them to go too deep and they let me down, I'm just going to be mad. So I don't want to deal with that. On the bottom half, we'll go with Tennessee again. I like picking the tens here against the sevens. I don't think they're going to pose a problem for Tennessee. Jake, before we get to the Elite Eight, do you have anything to say about Tennessee's potential second round matchup at either UCLA or Utah State, or against a team like Illinois or Kentucky, which of course would be quite a hot ticket if it did happen to be Kentucky?
Well, Tennessee scares me just in general with how the cold stretches they go on. Now they've not been as bad this year um, as in past, but the Utah State one, as well as they shoot, I mean they're putting up 80-ish points a game. Um, if they're on, that's tough. I mean, the thing is, what Tennessee does well, guards the 3-point arc very well. Um, that takes away their Utah State's biggest strength. I'm not as much worried, not as worried as UCLA, because UCLA is not an offensive team. I think anytime there's a defense on defense matchup, there might be maybe Houston might be, but like that would be very tight um, matchup. But like if it's offense, if you're mainly scoring by threes, I think the advantage goes to Tennessee. But yeah, I'm always nervous as a Tennessee fan. I don't know if it's in head or heart, just because we never seem to get it done when we need to get it done. Could have locked in a 1 seed if we don't really if you don't everything else stays the same, but we beat Ole Miss there. I think we lock in a 1 seed, but uh, lose on an offensive rebound to the worst offensive rebounding team in the league. So that kind of stuff always makes me nervous. The next matchup with it being is tough. Tennessee was haven't beat Kentucky because Kentucky just has our number this year. It's
Mm.
not none of the games have been really that close, and then we beat Illinois Illinois by 20. So the revenge factor lives there too. So I just never comfortable picking Tennessee past the second round. I do think they get it done either way, partially because of health for Kentucky, and I don't think Illinois does well against top tier defenses, and that's what they're going to run into against Tennessee.
Tennessee is kind of a fan favorite in the survivor pool to be used relatively early most years because I think of what you said. I think we're all kind of seeing the offensive sputterability, for lack of a better word, I'll make up, and that's just concerning when you get deeper, when you start playing better teams, because you just don't know if that's going to come back and bite you. But yes, they lock down so much on defense, and their offense isn't bad. It's like you said, it's better than it's been before. Sideline has them number 19 in the country, which is not necessarily good enough to win a national championship unless the chips fall right for you. But it's better than some of the offenses have been in the past, where they've been more in the 30s and 40s and kind of trickling down towards you're like, how is this offense in the tournament? Now it's solid. It's just, is it elite enough to make a multiple weekend run? Because that's hard to do.
Yeah,
And
for
I think
Tennessee
that's kind of what you're touching.
yeah, for Tennessee to make like Elite Eight, Final Four, Lanier's going to have to figure out that there's a second half to every game,
Mm.
and actually show up, and then
It's kind of scathing, to be honest,
yeah.
but here we are.
Well, I mean, look at
Seemingly.
you can look at the SEC tournament comes out murdering the first couple minutes, first halves of them. I think the first game had 19 or first 21 points, and then finished with 23 for the game. Like, he just where do you go in the second half, my guy?
Mm.
And the same thing in the next game, and then he's not there in the first half of the Florida game, and he's in foul trouble. We do better with him in the second half with him sitting on the bench. So I don't know.
Uh, all this to say, I'll finish up this region here for us. I'm gonna roll with Houston.
So,
It does put three number ones in the final four for us. I don't think that's overly likely. I kind of think I'm aiming for two of the three and I'm hoping they get A&M. Because getting all four final fours is very, very hard to do. And I'm more afraid personally that if I try to pick one of those three to lose, I will pick the wrong one because I think all three of them have some hurdles. We talked about Duke has a very tough matchup with the style of teams. I don't know if the committee does this on purpose or not,
hmm.
but the style of those teams with Arizona and Alabama could be really tough. Houston having their own sets of problems and a couple of tougher matchups, and then Florida, like we said, would be a great matchup with St. John's. It's just rather than trying to figure out who might lose out of that, I think I'm just going to take them all and try to play it a little bit safer. In this one, I'll advance Illinois past Tennessee simply because of what you've been saying, which is we don't really want to take Tennessee too far. Not to say they can't, but if they do, we're going to feel really dumb if they have a 45-point outing and they lose 58 to 45 or something,
Yeah.
in the second or third or fourth round. And so by picking them to win two games, we're kind of hedging our bets a little bit and saying they're not the team we're going to die on. And so what I mean by that, and this is again part of the bracket strategy, and again, it may not be the most sexy, and the more people in your pool, the more risky you want to be. But by setting up my final four this way, and specifically even my final eight, where I've got, I think three number twos as well. I mean, three number ones and three number twos late. I'm not dying on many hills that are crazy. And if I end up dying because Duke and Houston lose early, so did everyone else. And who was going to figure that out anyway? And good luck, right? Because that's the thing is if you're trying to figure that stuff out, good luck. But this way, I think I've set myself up in a position to be in things. Now the real question is who wins these games because this is where, unfortunately, for better or worse, your whole top everything is going to be decided. The whole top half of your pool is going to be decided on how many people can you even get in the national championship game because there's a big difference between getting none, one, and two. Two, you got a great shot at getting the full points, of course. One, at least you have a chance. So, Jake, we would have an SEC rematch here of A&M in Florida. Uh, a little bit of contrast in style there as well, based off what we talked about before. My hunch is you would say that A&M is not necessarily the best matchup for Florida. Is that correct?
Actually, I lean the other way. I think Florida.
Surprising me here. I like it.
I think A&M has a harder time with offense than what Tennessee does, and that point that'll go through like that. They really depend on Radford to really come through, and I think Florida has got too much going for it. I mean, uh, this game in a vacuum, I'm taking Florida almost every time. Um,
Yeah. Why could you
but
not?
yeah, but when you start adding all these dominoes of games, this is all in my head. You're going to bring out 17 statistics that prove me wrong, but they've already been on a 6 game winning streak, including the SEC tournament. Asking them to turn that to 12 feels extremely
Mhm.
difficult. Um, So I don't know. That's why I'm hesitant on Florida. But I mean, I would, like I said, in a vacuum, this game by itself, I'm picking Florida 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, and that's I think the tough part here is trying to balance that, especially for your strategy. Again, how risky do you want to be if you're in a pool of more people? A&M to make the title game is definitely a calling card, and you might die on that hill, but it is something that we think is at least possible, logical. They could also lose in the first round, right? So again, that's the whole point of this in the bracket. That's why I said survivor pools are better because, if you didn't pick them in the survivor pool, then who cares? You get to just root for the upset, right? And that's what makes it more fun is being able to do that. In fact, you want to root for the upsets because you're typically rooting against all the other people in the pool, right? So I think it aligns more with our normal watching abilities. But I think that's an interesting, kind of point you're making up there, or you were talking about there with having already won all those games. And I'm not necessarily going to focus in on the number in a row because that's actually statistically a little bit less relevant. All these teams would be coming in on really good winning streaks at this point. Even if you cut one conference tournament game off, I'm not sure what that does. But the point I want to come to actually is something very related to that, which is how many times have we seen a team win a conference championship and then win the national championship versus how many times have we seen a team win a game, stop caring, rest up, get healthy, and then go on to win the national championship. Of course, UConn, I feel like is just an exception to that because of how dominant they were, uh, it, up and down. But then I think about a team like Duke, who both rested up and won a conference championship. Kind of rested, they got a little bit worse. But after that first game, they basically were like, "Screw it, we're not playing anybody else if they even sneeze." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting thought process there. Like, how does all that play in? How does the fact that there's extra games play in potentially for Florida, who's the only team in this Final Four that we have who would have played all those games? A&M, bow out a little bit earlier. Houston, got a couple buys and then, won theirs. I guess they would have won three as well. Three, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they
Yeah.
would have also won three as
Blah, blah,
well.
blah. Yeah, same thing as Florida. Um,
Yeah. So how does that all play in? I think is the question that people have to really try to figure out. And unfortunately, I don't think we know. Um, Going back to our point here, having to pick someone between Florida and A&M, I'm going to stick with Florida for one reason and one reason only, and it has nothing to do with statistics even as much as it has to do with kind of the theme I've hopefully gotten across the whole time, which is um, I don't want to be deep with risky picks if I have a reason to avoid it. And this one, I have a very easy reason to say if I die a little bit with A&M and I'm dead wrong on that, and I'm not going to get every Final Four pick, at least I don't have to be doubly wrong by giving myself the best chance at having a national title game participant in Florida. On the other side, look, I'm just going to roll through this and finish this up. We've been here for a long time. I'm taking Duke to win it all. I'm treating them like UConn from a couple of years ago at this point. I'm not saying they will win it all. I didn't say UConn would then. I picked them. I said they're by far the best team. I'm assuming Cooper Flag's going to be healthy. I'm assuming they're by far the best team. I don't know what else there is to say, but Jake, the floor is yours if you want to talk about a Duke Houston matchup, a Duke anybody else matchup, Florida or whatever, to take us home with my official national championship pick here of Duke.
uh, Duke, Florida, that would be one of the more interesting title games
Mm-hmm.
since, which I hope it plays out better than this, than the Baylor Gonzaga year.
Mm.
Uh,
Which I was at, by the way. It's
yeah,
good
well,
times.
yeah, like that should have been better. Gonzaga didn't show up at all, and
The
Baylor,
first half,
yeah,
they kind of at the end. I don't know if the second half, but yeah, the first half was just. I
yeah,
kept waiting at the game. I was like, not trying not to get excited. I was
yeah,
like, when's Gonzaga going to hit a run? And then it just like never
yeah,
came. It was
yeah, and
awesome.
they got blitzed, and so I would hope, like to me, Florida's been a little bit under the radar a little bit about how good they've been because it's been
Yeah.
Auburn, 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 side of Duke, Auburn, 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 side of Duke. Um,
And then it shifted to Duke. But yeah,
yeah,
at the start it was all Auburn, and then it's all Duke, and then it's like, oh, but Florida's like kind of maybe better than Auburn anyway. Maybe I don't know. At least it's a discussion
yeah,
that we did not have all season. It seems like.
yeah, and like the depth of Florida is going to test Duke. Uh, I think player for player, Duke is probably better, but until you get to 8, 9, and then I think Florida.
It's like you said, those top two really it's just not fair to
Yeah.
have those two
Well,
guys, two
it's
top 10 players easily, and like
yeah,
hands down, not even
it
close.
comes down to Malik Brown, really, if I'm honest. Like
Mm,
Malik Brown, if I think Evan Mania had this, like there's there Malik Brown is as the eighth player rotation player for Duke was better than majority of the starting five for the rest of the like because he would have like saying he would have started
I bet
like
it.
legitimately started everywhere else, but he's
Yeah.
the eighth man in the rotation for Duke, and that was what separated it. With him out, that changes a lot of things. So I think this would be. I think Duke would do it. I think the size just kind of ends up really affecting Duke because like you see in the Louisville game and several games where these smaller guards are making passes that Duke has kind of forced them into a little bit longer passes, thinking, "Oh, this guy can't reach it," and then all of a sudden you forget that everybody on the floor is 6'6" and can reach everything. So it's just passes that are there aren't there anymore, and like I think Duke would win this game, but it really would shock me if Florida did. Um,
Oh yeah, Florida's a good enough team. No one would be surprised if they won it all. Malik Brown, we no one's talking about him because it's all Cooper Flag, of course. His injury status, we think he'd be back by this,
if,
though, right?
yeah, it's if he wants to. It's like
Okay,
from what I understand of his injury, it's the second time he's dislocated that same shoulder. It's
which
every
that's
time
never
you do it,
good.
it's more likely to do it unless you get
Yeah,
it surgically fixed. So
yeah,
it's, from my understanding, it's up to him because
okay,
surgery means he's done.
yeah, right.
If not, but I
But then
have
do you
zero
risk just
medical.
keep doing it,
I
and then
took
when do you stop?
yeah, I took one biology class in college, so and that wasn't even anatomies, so I have no clue how that works. But that is just a little bit I've understand with that. But
I think I'm under the same impression. Although I took no biology courses in college, so I don't know.
then
Maybe
like
we're not the experts on
yeah,
injuries, I guess.
of the final
uh,
four here, I'm very confident about Duke and Florida being there. The other two, I think, is a big question mark
yeah,
because I
yeah.
think your two best teams playing right now are Duke and Florida, and I hope and pray we get this. I've said this to many a friend recently. This year, I would pay for a playoff series for the top
Mm,
eight teams of the nation this year, and give
mm,
me just a few rounds of playoffs because I don't need the whole tournament because I think everybody is that good.
mm, mm. Uh, we are looking for how many total points would be scored because Florida being involved.
Ooh,
We would project this
let me guess
a little bit
before you
higher.
do it. Oh, you already put it in there. You
I already
choked.
put it in. Sorry.
Ah, I was going to say 147, but okay.
I'm going 150. I think historically the average amount of points in a national title game is more in the low 140s. Scoring has increased over the last couple of years. A lot of it's matchup based too, so I'm not sure I buy too much into the historical thing because it's just gonna matter so much who's there. Um, Here's what I will say, viewer: if you are in a pool with a lot of people. Now, the question is I don't know what a lot is. I'm going to define a lot by there is a reasonably good chance you can tie someone. The only way you're going to tie at the top is if you pick the title winner and both teams in the title game, and all the other weird lucky things happen as well. So, here's the good news for you this number doesn't matter unless you're in a pool with that many people. And the good news is, then when it matters, you do know the participants. So do pay attention to this number if you're in a pool with a lot of people, because if you pick Alabama, if you pick Florida, if you pick St. John's, you're talking about a very different style of game than if you pick Houston and A&M or whatever, right? And so the fact that the number only matters almost assuredly in the event you have both teams means you can take both teams and stay away from this, what the average in this history is, and actually look at those two. And you can go find a website out there that'll give you a pretty good projection, probably. Again, my model's built. I can give you projections from a half dozen models right here. Uh, and pick a number near that because now you're more likely to be in the right ballpark by picking higher numbers or lower numbers for the right scenario rather than just sticking to something like 140. So that's my spiel there. Jake, parting words. I think we're about 3 hours now of bracket coverage. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know how many people will be watching after 3 hours, but whatever it is, if there is anybody left, you got the floor.
Like this is the best time of the year. Everybody and their brother does the bracket pool, and I am staunchly on the other side that bracket pools are more fun because it brings in the craziness of like a guy for some reason in fraternity we did this and a guy would pick teams based on how many people he knew closer to that school, and me and him were in the finals like two every year, and we traded who won and lost for like those 4 or 5 years. That kind of stuff you don't get with survivor pools. You don't get my wife picking based on colors or the dog picking left or right. Like that's the kind of stuff that makes this fun.
Well, if we're gonna do that, I think next year, either in lieu of this or in addition to this, we just need to do a bracket based off like which animal we think would beat the other in a fight. Because then we could get some good arguments, and some
Yeah,
would be really fast. Others would be like, "Ooh, I don't really know." And especially like if Stanford makes it next
the
year,
tree.
like yeah, we could have some real fun depending on who makes it. And I'd actually learn some of these mascots because like I could probably give you about 80% of them, but there's probably 20% that I would really be like, I don't think I've seen them enough to really know. But I do know way more of these probably than I
But
should.
then you're going to have to
If you're
define
still,
Aggie, and
oh yes, that would be the other problem is how to define that. Or then when they play each other, then what do you do? I guess you have to like have a rule that you prevent that from happening unless it's a first round game, and then just your head explodes. Um, if you're still with us, though, thank you so much for watching. We wish you, as always, the best of luck. We have way more content coming this week for college basketball, way more over on Dub Club, so check that out if you haven't yet. Otherwise, though, we remind you that you can eat your betting money, but please do not bet your eating money.